the murder of George Floyd, horrific murder. Trump's response to it, like the disintegration of law and order currently in the states and in the cities, and the whole aspect of racism over there, and its resurgence as a major topic in social media and in the media. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, no, then that's a huge subject. As a lawyer, as an ex-lawyer, I have to say, though I say this really hesitantly, lest it's misunderstood, the alleged murder of Mr. Floyd, because one of the most important things for any society is to have the rule of law, and the rule of law means that no one is criminally guilty until they've undergone due process, and due process means that there must be a fair trial. I mean, it's patently obvious to me, as it is to everyone, that this was an appalling murder, and it's been up now from third degree. I think the charge now has been up to second degree murder and a certain degree of manslaughter. I don't know what the American system is for first, second, and third degree. Be that as it may, it's pretty obvious the man was murdered, but I'm just putting that caveat in, and it will be a test of any country's legal system. There's that wonderful film with Tom Hanks. What's it called? It's not A Bridge Too Far. I can't remember.
I know what you mean, yeah.
Where he's defending a man who's being charged as a Russian spy. And this is at the height of the Cold War. It's based on a real life event. And basically, what the film presents is, look, we've got to show to the world that we're honestly, so this fellow's an eminent lawyer, you must defend him. But he, though, takes this very serious. He's going to do a really good,
Bridge of Spies.
Yeah, Bridge of Spies. He's going to do a very good job of it. And now he suddenly has everybody against him. He has the media against him, even the judge. This is a man. No, he says, the man is entitled to a fair trial. Now, I think it is a test. It's a test of any democracy with its claim to the rule of law. Will you give this man a fair trial? And I think that's crucial. That having been said, I'm just saying that I think that has to be said, but it looks a pretty open and shut case, doesn't it? Nevertheless, it must still be a case that's tried by due process. Whether there is institutional systemic racism in the US police force, I'm not qualified to comment upon. There's a simple answer to that. I'm not saying there is, I'm not saying there isn't, I just don't know enough about it. I would say that one has to bear in mind the history of slavery, seizing black people from their homeland, herding them worse than cattle would be herded today, on boats, manacled, many of them dying. That is obviously deep in the psyche of black Americans. Anyone who doesn't see that is bound to be missing something of massive, massive importance. It's almost reawakening a collective memory. I've certainly come across examples of frightening racism, which I won't mention, from the USA. But you can't, of course, tar the whole country because of some people being racists. Whether their institutions are racist, I'm not qualified to say. It was a good day for the US. I'm not referring to the politics now. I'm not referring to um, the rights and wrongs. I look at it both from a Republican and from a Democrat point of view. It was a very good day when George Bush Jr. had Condoleezza Rice in his government as a black woman for whom he had huge respect. And it was a very good day for the United States when they had Barack Obama elected as a president, as a black president. So the fact that you can have in the administration of George Bush, Condoleezza Rice, says that you can be a black person and rise to very high positions in a Republican government. And equally, you can be a Barack Obama and become leader of the Democrats and their president. So that speaks well for American life. Whether there is systemic racism in their police, I don't know. And of course, one of the problems you've got is that it is the United States of America, and each state has got its own police force, hasn't there? There may well be regional differences. On the rioting, I would distinguish between peaceful protest, which I see as an extension of the right of freedom of speech. And of course, the right of freedom of speech is a huge thing in the USA. I would distinguish that from violent protests, by which I mean smashing up shops and looting them. That's criminality. Now, one may understand people's frustration. I don't know enough about the riots in the US. I'm not qualified to speak. But it may be that they've just reached such a level of frustration that they are venting their spleen, as it were, on businesses. But one can't approve of that. One can't approve of it. One of the problems is, of course, that whenever you get peaceful protests, you will have people who want to hijack it, and you will have people who want to then turn a peaceful protest into something violent. And that can be for a number of reasons. You can simply have a criminal element that wants to take advantage of things. You may also, and I'm not saying this is what's happening in the US, but it has undoubtedly happened historically. You can have agents provocateurs. You can have people who want to discredit a peaceful protest, and then they turn it into a violent, violent riot. But I would distinguish sharply peaceful protest then from violent rioting. And the problem then comes, if you know in advance how a peaceful protest is going to be hijacked, what do you then do? Do you then say, well, actually, we can't peacefully protest, because if we do peacefully protest, it's going to turn into something very, very violent. And that's a difficult one. On the broader issue of race, Paul Robeson, the black singer, I think, summed up what is the Bible's teaching very nicely when he once said there is only one race, the human race. And that's right. J.C. Ryle, 19th century, first Bishop of Liverpool, Anglican, evangelical man, has a wonderful sermon entitled One Blood. It's Paul's words to the people of Athens, where Paul says of God, of one blood, he has made all nations of people to dwell on the earth. And that's fundamental to the Bible's teaching, that the entire human race descends from the first couple, the first man, Adam, and his wife, whom he later named Eve. And he names her Eve because she would become the mother of all living. So fundamental to the Bible's teaching is the entire human race has descended from this couple. We are one race. And then in terms of Christian teaching, well, as one race, we share the same dignity because we've all been made in the image of God. So whether you're Chinese, Japanese, British, Belgian, Bangladeshi, whether you're black, white, yellow, whether you're brown, is irrelevant. Whether you're brought up in a slum or brought up in a palace, everyone shares the same dignity in the image of God. Secondly, we all share the same depravity. We're all sinners. White people are sinners, black people are sinners, yellow people are, we're all sinners. The Bible is emphatic on this. Thirdly, we may all share the same deliverance in Jesus Christ. So Paul puts it like this, in Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free, former Lord Chief Justice and Master of the Rolls, and former senior judge senior judge in what was then the House of Lords before it became the Supreme Court, Lord Bingham, in his book The Rule of Law, says when Paul penned those words in the Roman Empire, they were massively revolutionary. He's not denying that slavery existed. He's not denying that there's a difference, there's a biological difference between male and female. He's not denying there are cultural differences between Jews and Gentiles. What he is saying is that none of those differences matter at all to whether Jesus Christ delivers us. So we share a common dignity, a common depravity. Those who come to Christ share a common deliverance. But now here's the wonderful thing, the diversity still exists. But these unities can be expressed through diversity. And so people in African countries have their own distinctive cultures. Uganda will be different from Nigeria and from another. And of course, the whole African continent is going to be different from Europe. And then we'll have ours. And the biblical picture in the last book of the Bible is that the glory of the nations is brought into the New Jerusalem. So that every nation has something to contribute. This diversity is something in which to glory, something through which the unity is expressed. Now, with respect to President Trump, again, I don't know enough about what the media is presenting. The issue of him standing outside a church with the Bible has divided opinion. Most people see that as almost an act of sacrilege. Others have said he was going to the church where every president has worshipped since, going back into the 18th century, I think. My point would be a different point. I look at it more generally. Jesus Christ said, "Do not do your acts of piety to be seen by men." So let's forget about President Trump. If I go to church and I carry a Bible with me because I need my Bible to preach, that's why I'm doing it. If I want people to see me carrying my Bible, I'm infringing what Jesus Christ said. I'm drawing attention. I've got a Bible. No, don't do that. Don't do that at all, says Jesus. So I'm only posing the question, what is the purpose of standing outside the church holding a Bible? Is it drawing attention to oneself? Is it drawing attention to an act of piety? If it is, it's wrong. Whether it's the President of the US, whether it's me standing outside our church. If I'm standing outside of a church and I am photographed with a Bible in my hand, in order to say, this is a church, this is the pastor of the church, and this is a pastor who believes that the Bible is to be the authority, and I'm holding it for that reason, that's different. Since we're not to judge people's motives and their hearts, I don't know President Trump's heart. I don't know his motive. We're not to be naive, on the one hand. Equally, we're not to seek to judge people's hearts. Why should I judge? I've got enough to do with sorting myself out and God judging me. Everyone will give account of himself to God, says the Bible. Right, that's what I've got to be concerned about. God is President Trump's judge, not me. And if President Trump is just playing fast and loose and wanting to score political points, but with some of his support base for doing this, God is well able to hold him to account. I would have thought that the very existence of the coronavirus demonstrates in a spectacular way that God is God and he can bring the whole world to a standstill if he so wants, and he can well deal with the president who if it is the case is just using this for political ends. He can do that. And if he doesn't do it in life, he'll do it on the day of judgment. If, however, President Trump was wanting to make another point, however much that's been misunderstood, and if he was simply wanting to make a point, I should be able to walk to this church with a Bible in my hand, then of course fair enough. I just don't know enough about it. Now then, it would be wrong, therefore, for me to express a view there. I would say this. I saw a thing that somebody had shared. Holding up the Bible is not the same as upholding the Bible. I think that's important. I think that's very important. But in other words, I think on both sides of this debate, there's the danger of people rushing to defend him. You know, there he is holding the Bible up, but hang on, we mustn't be naive. He may be making a political point. The majority seem to be taking that view. This is a sacrilegious act. You know, him being photographed holding up the Bible. Yeah, but hang on, we don't know his heart. I can't judge him at that point. So, if it was the case that peaceful protesters had tear gas let loose on them simply so that he could walk and have that photograph taken, then politically I think that's not the wisest thing for him to have done, to break up a peaceful protest. If, however, it was rioting and he's wanting to make a point that law and order is in play here, there we are. I don't know enough about what's going on out there.
That's a very helpful point to make. Rushing in to opinion is never a good idea. And assuming people's motives as well. On everything. On
the legal world. I once had a client where the evidence against him was so stacked up. It was an extremely serious offence. He was charged with aggravated arson. That he'd stood outside his ex-wife's house with newspapers. He'd soaked them in paint. And he'd already pushed a lighted tissue through the letterbox. That had caused some plastic to melt. And he had all these newspapers soaked in paint. He's ready to, push those through and ignite the whole lot. So it was a very, very serious offence he was charged with. Well, no, he came to see me. I didn't believe what he was telling me. I didn't believe him at all. That this man is as guilty can be. But the lawyer's job is to represent his case. I'm not his judge. I'm not his jury. Because it was a Crown Court case and it therefore required a barrister for rights of audience. When I sent all the papers to the barrister, he said, I'm uneasy about some of this. The more we dug, it became clear that in fact it was a put-up job and he was being framed. And in fact, he admitted pushing, he had the mental age of a 7-year-old or 8-year-old. He admitted pushing the Kleenex tissue through, but he said I knew nothing about these newspapers, nor did he know anything about the newspapers. And the result was that before it ever came to trial, the aggravated arson charge was dropped, a much lesser charge was substituted, and instead of being banged up in one of Her Majesty's prisons for quite a long period of his life, he was put on probation. And I had another client once who had been charged with theft, and her story was so unbelievable. In the end, I said, no court in the land is going to believe this. And so I suppose I said, look, if you plead not guilty, you're going to get a much heavier sentence because you're obviously going to be convicted on what you told me. She was adamant she hadn't committed the offence. She said, I will plead guilty then. Well, I knew a lawyer in the same practice who knew this lady, and so I was preparing what's known as a plea in mitigation. That is, she would plead guilty, but how could I get the most lenient sentence fairly for her? And I said, tell me a little bit about her. And she then told me, she said that that particular time in her life, she had a relationship breakup. She collapsed mentally. She didn't know what she was doing. She was on medication. Suddenly this lady's story made sense. I contacted her. I said, you didn't tell me any of this. Oh, yes, that happened. She was on medication. Her doctor wrote to me, yes, this medication would mean that she'd be doing things she wouldn't even know what she was doing. Well, that changed everything. She pleaded not guilty and she was acquitted. So something which, if I had just gone on what initially was presented to me, this woman has obviously knowingly taken something that didn't belong to her. No, she hadn't. And I think that's taught me we've got to know all the facts and we've got to know both sides.
Take the Black Lives Matter slogan.
Yeah.
I would say, I would personally not use that. If I was to use a slogan, I don't. I'd say all lives matter, which is one that's been bandied around. Some people take offence to that because they feel like it's diminishing the hardship of black
I
people.
think that's a political judgment. I think if you're in a society where black lives have been treated cheaply,
Which I was going to come on to, yeah. You've got the other side of that then, of the debate, which
Yeah.
is that we can't understand, and there's so much we don't know about what black people in this country and in the US particularly have been through.
I think the Black Lives Matter is arising from the fact that black lives, the claim is made that black lives have not been treated equally with white lives.
Yeah.
If that claim is true, then clearly I think Black Lives Matter is the right slogan. I mean, I have a book on my shelf here which contains one of the most racist remarks I've ever read in my life. And it's a remark by a man who was a great theologian and preacher in one of the Southern Presbyterian states in the 19th century. His name was Robert Dabney. But you see, on the race issue, well, it's just appalling. He actually says, what is more clear than that the white man is to lead and the black man to follow? It's a paper where he's against black people being elders in the church. And there's only one word to say with that. That was sheer racism. I read the entire speech that he gave, and it's a colossal blind spot that he had. It's frightening. Now then, I heard within the last 30 years, I heard this sometime between 1991 and 1998, when I was pastor of my previous church. A family in the church there, they'd gone to USA and they'd spent some time down in the southern states, and I think it was in the Texas area, and they were staying with a family who were regarded as fine Christians, and their younger daughter was with them who's not a Christian. And it was a white family, and one of the people in this white family said, "Oh, I could never lie between sheets that a black person had slept between." Well, their daughter was understandably horrified, and as a result of that, she didn't have anything to do with Christianity. Because here was a so-called evangelical church, Bible-believing, not speaking with someone out on what would be regarded as the lunatic fringe, but a respected member of the society and of the church, saying she couldn't sleep between sheets between which a black person had slept. I mean, that is just horrific. And I think that's part of the problem. If you've got those kinds of attitudes in Bible-believing churches, wow, I mean, what's happening with those who aren't believing the Bible? But you see, let me give an example of how racism can affect us in this country. There was a German student in the theological college in the town where I'm based, and he went to preach in a church that's well known in Wales. It's a very strong Bible-believing church, etc., etc. And after he preached, somebody at the door, Christian person, shook his hand and said, "Have you got over losing the war yet?" That just beggars belief. Have you got over losing the war yet? Now that, it seems to me, was a massively racist remark. Massively racist remark. Of course, you can get racism within the United Kingdom. A very good friend of mine, Lindsay Brown, was preaching, and he's a very patriotic Welshman, but he said to this group, "I have far more in common with an English Christian than a Welsh pagan." And a fellow Welsh Christian said to him, "Oh, I've got problems with that." And Lindsay said, "If you've got problems with that, you've got problems. You've got big problems." And I sometimes think that the banter that goes on, there's a friendly banter between the English and Welsh, but sometimes I think it crosses a line. It can work both ways. The English can say to the Welsh, because I live in Wales, I hear it more from the Welsh side, almost demeaning English people. That's a form of racism. People up in Yorkshire, very different culturally from people down in Kent, and the lusher parts of Surrey. I mean, so you've got these regional differences within, you know, within the same nation. Even within Wales, there's a difference between people in the South Wales valleys, where I come from, and people brought up in Cardiff.
I think this kind of thing certainly helps to shine a light on that kind of prejudice within churches.
Speaking to Lindsay Brown, because he was for many years General Secretary of IFES, the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students. And before he became the General Director, he spent quite a bit of time working in Africa. And he's always been very close to Africans. Well, of course, when you have the civil war in Rwanda had revival in the 20th century. And I remember saying to Lindsay, I'm puzzled as to how it is, that a country that's had revival, you had Christians in the one tribe, the Hutu tribe, killing Christians in the Tutsi tribe, or vice versa. And he said, yeah, well, what happened? So they had revival, but they didn't get Bible teaching on tribe and tribalism. So when the Civil War erupted, although these were Christian people, they went back to a default tribal position because the Word of God hadn't been expounded in its fullness to deal with tribalism. So you had black people in the same country killing black people, which goes to show that racism is a problem of human nature. Black people have suffered appallingly at the hands of white people as a result of racism. But of course, Jewish people suffered appallingly, as did some other groups, Slavs, racism during the Nazi regime. And of course, in the civil war in former Yugoslavia, you had racism with Serbs and Croats. And then, of course, in the civil war in Rwanda, you got the same thing with Hutus and Tutsis against each other. So what the common denominator in all this is sin. And that's why the remedy to racism is the gospel, is the teaching of the Bible with the power of the Holy Spirit. That's crucial. It's not just the teaching of the Bible, but it's the power of the Holy Spirit enabling a person to rise against racism. And I think in our own context in the UK, if the majority of people in the church are from the UK, we've got a really huge responsibility to then those who come into the church who come from other countries. And we've also got a responsibility to Britons who may be second or third generation of immigrants who came to this country. And although they're in this country, because of their extended family, they're still going to have a lot of cultural things which they cherish that belong to that base from which their ancestors came. And I think we really mustn't say, oh, you're in Britain now, so you've got to do it the British way. I think we have to say, well, the church is an international community, and although we must express our Britishness, it's good for you to express your Indian culture, your Pakistani culture, insofar as that's a legitimate expression of Christian faith. Obviously, there are things in British culture and in all cultures which are bad, so we've got to iron those out. There are things which are good, there are things which are neutral. And I think we have to be willing to learn. I think people who often come from Asian communities have got an awful lot to teach us about the importance of the extended family and of respect for the elderly. I think that's an area where they have a massive input, not just from Asian families, from many African families. I think Africans have got a lot to teach us. So we need to be willing to learn, and in then ensuring that they feel comfortable, we mustn't be patronizing. There's a two-way traffic. We've got to learn a lot from them.
Careful what I say, but the type of church meeting where it feels, to me, most wonderful in some sense is when you have such a mix of ethnicity. I mean, that obviously is not a requirement because some churches and populations haven't got a large amount of diversity in them. But in the ones where there is, like cities, to be in a place like that where there is such diversity, it's so wonderful because it is a reminder that this gospel is for all cultures and all races.
And it's
all
an anticipation of
sexes.
heaven. It's
Yes.
an
Yes.
I think this came home to me some years ago. Back in 2006, I had the privilege to preach for 2 weeks at a Pastors and Christian Workers Conference in Uganda. And the meetings were held in this sort of big area that just had a covering over it, because it was the rain season, but the rain season wasn't like rain in Wales. It just meant it was sunny most of the time, and you might have a downpour for 45 minutes, after which there'd be no clouds and lovely weather again. So we'd take there was a field by, and we would take there was a tent where we would get our main meals, and there were about 700 at each of these conferences. A lot of people, you had to queue. Well, after one session I'd been preaching it, I was speaking with a group of pastors, and after we chatted for a while, I said, "Oh, sure." I was just chatting now with this one man. I said, "Oh, let's go down for our lunch now." And he said, "I'll have to wait." I said, "Why wait?" He said, "I've got a heart problem." He said, I can't walk down there with all the others. I'll have to wait." And I said, "I tell you what," I said, "you sit here. I'll go and get your lunch for you." "You can't do that," he said. I said, why can't I do that?" He said, "Well, you were one of the visiting preachers from Britain." I said, "Man," I said, "You're my brother." I said, "You're my brother. I'm about 20 years younger than you. You've got a heart condition I haven't." I said, "What is more natural for me when I get my lunch to get yours, and I bring it back?" And I remember discussing that afterwards with Keith Walker, who used to be a minister in your neck of the woods, and we'd gone out there together. The two, he and I were the two preachers. Well, he said, unfortunately, he said, over the years, when people have come sometimes from the UK and from the US, there's been this idea, we've got it. And you were listening. They've had revival in Uganda more recently than we've had it in the UK. The church in Uganda is numerically much stronger than this country, and its impact upon the community, I would say, is much more powerful than it has been for us in this country. So there's something a bit nauseating about white pastors going from Europe or America and making people to feel, now we've arrived, you've got to listen to us. That's appalling. That's racism.
That is. And to add to what I was saying before, you can say, "Oh, isn't it wonderful? Look at this, all the great diversity of ethnicity and culture. Now they've got to fall into line." No, it's give and take. And your point there about give and take is very important, and not just on all matters. Michael Reeves made a point to me when I was interviewing him that tribalism is one of the great problems in the UK, not just in terms of race, but denominationally, politically, all sorts of things. And the race issue is topical, and the culture issue flows from that. And it is wicked. And it is, I don't know what it is, a sense of entitlement because of our heritage, which we think is so wonderful, which it is, but compared to what? It's true that the West has had a great blessing, Wales, UK, but so over the places, as you say, and so more recently. A lot of it as well is the need for people to adjust. I mean, because there's places, as I said, that have not got a large population, and as the population changes, population of different cultures grows, and people maybe need time to ease into that, but there needs to be this bringing down of barriers, and we are all one in Christ. And as you say,
pastors have got to give teaching on this.
Right.
I mean, can't see how anybody can preach through the Bible without this issue coming up fairly regularly. It dominates so much of the New Testament. I mean, a careful reading of the letter to the Romans, you can see that there are tensions between Jewish Christians and non-Jewish Christians. Why is Paul saying to the Jew first, then the Gentile, to the Jew first, then the Jew? it seems that what was happening was that the church's complexion in Rome was changing. It was becoming a majority Gentile church, and they were beginning to look down their nose at the Jews, which is why that permeates the whole letter. On the other hand, in Galatians, you've got the problem working the other way then. You've got Gentile Christians who are looking, thinking, well, we're not really going to be full Christians unless we buy into all things Jewish. Race is a huge thing there. Peter going to the household of Cornelius. I know that there's a religious dimension to this, of course, but it's a racial, religious issue. Jesus, the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus speaking with the woman of Samaria. Even, dare I say, and I think this is where the New Testament becomes massively, massively challenging. If you're in America at the moment with this race issue, who are the equivalent of the tax collectors? Because the tax collectors were those in the employ of the Roman authorities who were allowed to be a bit of a law unto themselves, to fleece the people and charge more than was legitimately due. So the Jews were under the jackboot of Rome. You have let me rephrase that, they were under the authority of Rome. You have the tax collectors who were really working for this alien regime, as many Jews viewed it. They're often being dishonest and they're fleecing the poor people. And yet, Jesus eats with them, drinks with them, is willing to call them to be his disciples, and people are outraged. Now then, drop that into what's going on in America today. Mm-hmm. Wow, I think that then becomes frighteningly challenging. Because if it is right that there is systemic abuse of power in certain states of the US on the part of the police, might they be the equivalent of the tax collectors? Yeah, but Jesus Christ went into the house of a tax collector called Zacchaeus, and he was the kingpin tax collector. And it wasn't just the religious leaders now. Everyone is muttering, how on earth can he do that? But actually, of course, he goes there because it's not the whole who need a physician, but the sick. And Zacchaeus is a very, very spiritually, morally sick man. He's desperately sick, but Christ goes to him and he's made new. And the result of that is suddenly a lot of people get Christmas coming early because he gives half of his money away to the poor. And anyone he's fleeced, he says, I'm going to give you back 4 times that I cheated you from. Now, there's an enormous challenge. It's going to be very easy as part of virtue signaling at the moment for evangelicals to say Black Lives Matter, and they do. And if Black lives have been under the boot, I think that slogan is entirely right. But every human being matters, and that means, and I saw this posted by a black pastor yesterday. I know him. I used to teach him theology. He's a fine, fine black pastor from Africa. I think he's Nigerian, but he's now pastoring a church in London, and he really took up the cause of the black people who've been suffering. But then at the end of his post on social media, he said, we need to pray for this police officer, Chauvin or whatever his name. We need to pray. The man has a soul. I pray, he says, that justice will be done, but I pray that the mercy of God will reach this man and he'll be saved and become my brother in Christ. Now that is authentic biblical Christianity. And I think how good it was for a black pastor who's really been speaking eloquently about how black people have been downtrodden, then to say that, I just think that was glorious.
Yes, yes. And that might be a good place to close. I think, not just in America, in our own society here, it's a challenge. Who are the tax collectors? in our society. That's a very good point. There, but for the grace of God, go I. No.
They're the
Good place
people
to
who were
end.
destroying other people's lives, because that's what the tax collectors were doing. They were and they were often destroying the poor people. And Jesus, who did so much with the poor, would still go in to Zacchaeus' house. And of course, let's not forget that I know it doesn't actually say this, but the tradition is very, very strong that the author of the first gospel was Matthew. And Matthew, of course, before becoming a disciple of Jesus Christ, had been a tax collector. What a wonderful thing that a man who being a tax collector becomes a man who proclaims the good news of Jesus and lives it.
Yes. Stephen Clark, thank you.
My privilege. Ciao.